So welcome everyone. Good evening to all of you awesome coaches for signing in on this evening. Hopefully you've had dinner and are well settled in to view this new learning. So it is my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the learning management team, which has put together this very relevant webinar for you. I'm Priya Sharma Sheikh. I'm your host for the evening, and I'm a leadership and life transformation coach with a PCC accreditation from ICF. I'm also a part of the ICF board as its secretary, and I head the communications vertical. So today we focus on an exploration of democratizing coaching in organizations. The power of coaching to raise awareness and transform behavior in a short time frame is becoming more recognized and appreciated in the business world. You will agree with me as I say this, that the relatively high cost of coaching has limited its application to small populations of key executives and high potentials only. With the advent of various digital learning platforms, the cost of coaching solutions can be significantly decreased, making it a viable solution for a wider employee base, which can then change the very nature of how organizations approach the development of their talent in the future. So the objective of today's webinar this evening is to explore different strategies for utilizing coaching as a major talent lever in corporate environments. So our webinar this evening is being facilitated by Pamela Siliato, who interestingly was first certified in scuba diving at a young age of 15 years old. And then in November 2019, she got her scuba diving recertification from PADI in Bali, and she really did want to become an underwater archaeologist. And you never know, she might just still do it. I believe that if you have a dream, it somehow gets fulfilled. So Pam, there's some things coming up in the future for you. But for now, she is the global head of talent management for Marvell Technologies, a semiconductor company headquartered in Santa Clara, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley. Pam is a strategic talent development executive with over 25 years of progressive leadership expertise in high-tech, biopharma, medical device, and power industries. She has worked as a leader in talent management, people development, and performance improvement for large global organizations such as Marvell Technologies, AbbVie, Google Medtronic, Hewlett-Packard, Applied Materials, and Pacific Gas and Electric Company. Pamela holds an MA in Education Instructional Technology from San Francisco State University, and as well a BA in Social Cultural Anthropology from University of California in Berkeley. In addition, she holds professional certifications in organization development from NTL Oxford, United Kingdom, the CAP Master Change Agent from GE, and executive coaching from Performance Consultants International in London, United Kingdom. Pam has a professional interest in cross-cultural communication and teamwork. She has managed remote staff, led dispersed global teams, and worked in Western Europe, Central America, and Asia. Pamela also serves on the board for the Savor Foundation, MedLink, and Joyful You organizations, and does pro bono work for nonprofit organizations. That's all from me, Pamela. Take it away and go right ahead and share your wisdom with us as we look forward to it.
Thank you so much. That was a very gracious introduction, much more than I thought. So thank you. And also to everybody listening in, I'm very comfortable with an interactive session. So if people do want to ask questions, put it in the chat box and I'm happy to answer them. So don't be shy. I'm okay with being interrupted throughout the presentation. So this is really for you to make sure that your learning continues in the area of coaching. So what I was really hoping to do tonight is to share some experiences with you around how do we actually democratize coaching in a real way in the corporate world. In the corporate world today, there still remains a barrier to the masses in terms of coaching. Some unique organizations like Google and Medtronic, those are two that I can talk about specifically, have large-scale coaching practices throughout the organization at all levels. but the average company, multinational, does not. Most coaching is limited to executive coaching only, and that is to executives at the top and high potentials in the organization. So it's a very small percentage of the population. So everyone else is kind of on their own to find ways of development, either through L&D courses or other development solutions available in the organization. But coaching being so powerful in terms of transformation, it's a pity that something like this is not more available to the masses. So I'll show you how we actually made that happen in one organization I worked for on a fairly low budget. So it wasn't that costly to do so. All right, so with no more ado, let's go to the next slide. This next slide is just about a little bit about me. So this is about my current company. Let me just tell you a little bit about it. The company was founded in 1995. It's a semiconductor company. So it's right in the heart of Silicon Valley. We now have about 7,000 employees. We just completed 2 acquisitions. And so the company has already grown. The FY19 revenue is 3.4 billion. You can see that we are in the center of innovation. We have 10,000 plus patents. And we have already been rewarded by Forbes as being one of the best mid-sized employers in America. So it's a company that's been around for a while. It's also global. We actually have a very big presence in India. We have 3 different sites in India, in Pune, Hyderabad, and Bangalore. And so I'll be talking about what we're going to be doing within Marvell globally. Okay, so here's the learning outcomes for today. The first is really to examine the barriers to democratize coaching in organizations. So we'll talk a little bit about that. What are the things that get in the way? And mostly it's awareness, and the second thing is cost. Then we're going to explore various coaching options to democratize coaching in organizations. So what are some of the ways that we can actually look at getting in the door in a large-scale multinational organizations on a big scale, not small, but big scale? Then benchmark one company's approach, and I want to show you how we actually developed the value proposition that allowed us to continue with large-scale coaching in a multinational. And then we'll touch on the importance of some things like branding and communications and some other things that you have to be thinking about when consulting with a large company and trying to get into large-scale coaching. Okay. So the barriers to democratizing coaching is first awareness. I think most of you are probably have experienced this in your own coaching practice. There are some issues in corporations that coaching is very expensive. And if you do have like traditional 6-month engagements, it can be expensive. It could be anywhere from $20,000 to $35,000 USD for a 6-month engagement. But that 6-month engagement is quite robust and intense and deep. And so it's normally limited to only the top. Also, I think there needs to be a paradigm shift. I think it's happening, but it's not complete yet. And that paradigm shift is around people in the organization, so employees at all levels of the organization, understanding that coaching is not something that means you're not meeting expectations. So there's still some employees in the organization who think, oh my gosh, if my boss is suggesting I get an executive coach or just a coach, it must mean that I'm really doing poorly and that there's something to fix, rather than look at it as one of the most transformational ways of stretching and developing oneself. I think that's changing if you look in Silicon Valley, especially at the millennial population. I think the idea of coaching has really shifted to a much more positive bend, and it's really around strengths and around realizing one's potential. But still, because we have multi-generations in the organization, there's still a paradigm shift in some of the older generations that really need to take place. So that needs to happen just through awareness and through education in the organization. The third barrier to democratizing coaching is dollars. So the first, usually executive coaching is tied to, or just coaching, is tied to a learning and development organization. It could also be tied to a talent development organization, which is larger than learning and development. L&D would be a subset of talent development, and sometimes tied to a talent management organization that combines talent acquisition along with talent development. So the dollars in the organization is based upon, usually they'll look at the employee count and then determine a specific dollar amount per employee that is set aside for a development budget. And then that becomes the entire budget for everything that you have to do in the organization. So what happens is it ends up being a very small amount that you can allocate towards coaching. Now, there's another way of getting around that, where once you raise the awareness and you increase education in the organization, you can have a chargeback system where your clients, whoever they are in the business units or in other parts of the organization, will pay for it out of their own budget. But organizations will only do that if they are convinced of the value proposition. So that's a really big issue that you need to handle in order to get people to accept the idea that they're going to have to pay additional dollars for their development. Time is another issue, funny enough. I can't speak for other organizations at this time, but I do know that at least within my own organization and those that I've worked in the past, people are always nose to the ground. They're working really hard and they have to work at a very fast pace. And so they perceive that they don't actually have enough time to invest in a coaching relationship, which of course is not true. It's the opposite. If you invest the time up front, it's kind of go slow to go fast. So if you actually invest in coaching, the benefits from that will far outweigh any time investment that you need to make. But again, that's another sort of educational process that needs to take place. So what I have found is that it's really good to get a groundswell of people, small, it could be 10 people, a dozen people in the organization who are in key positions and are seen as role models for development, who really become your advocates, but they're in the business. They're not in HR or not in L&D or not in talent development. They're actually business people who have really understood the magic of coaching and what it can do for people, and so advocate for it from the business. So that's a way around some of these barriers. Now, I know there's probably other barriers that people have encountered. Okay, so here are some options for actually democratizing coaching in large organizations and mid-sized organizations. The first is through digital solutions. So when I talk about digital solutions, what I mean are platforms like BetterUp, Lingo Live, platforms that will allow for a small fee ongoing coaching in the organization. Most of the coaching done today is done remotely anyway. There's not a lot, except at the, like executive level, where it is done face to face. And even that, sometimes the relationship is formed face to face in the beginning, and then the remaining coaching may be done remotely. So because we have technology, using digital platforms becomes a very viable solution. So the difference, for example, is for around 6 months of coaching, not at the same level that you're getting when you do an executive coaching solution, but it's around $2,500, so $2,500 versus $35,000. So this becomes something that now becomes open to more and more people from an affordability standpoint. Team coaching, excuse me, is another form of democratizing coaching. There's interventions that are being done all the time in organizations where you might have a team that's either new and just forming, so needs help getting off the ground, or a team that's in disarray for one reason or another, is dysfunctional, and so there's an intervention being done. And when the OD consultant, the organization development consultant, or the talent development representative goes in to work with the team, coaching is one of the solutions, either as a team in a group, or the individual coaching of each of the team members, but it's under the guise of team coaching. So that's another way of bringing in coaching into an organization that may be otherwise resistant. Now, one of the ways that worked the best for me is an internal coaching cadre. And you find a small group of line managers, so not professional HR people or people who necessarily have an ICF certification. You find interested advocates of development in the organization who are line managers, who are interested in going through training themselves in how to coach at a much deeper level. And you put them through a fairly intensive training around becoming coaches. And then part of their job in the organization, it could be 10%, it could be 20%, it depends on the organization, is actually doing nothing but coaching. So this is not something that all organizations are open to, but I'm going to be sharing with you a case study where we were able to do this at a large scale. And that is what's happening now at Medtronic and also at Google. So let's take a look at internal coaching cadres. So in my case, where I used to work, the reason or platform for going through this change was we went through a fairly big organizational restructuring that was based on reducing spans of control. That means at each level of the organization, how many direct reports does a manager have? And so there was a need to reduce the layers in the organization. I think we had like 12 to something like 6, almost 50% reduction in terms of the layers, the hierarchy. That meant that the spans of control, meaning how many people actually report into a manager, would change from like 1 to 2 to maybe 10. So, or 8 is the optimal number. And this is to increase efficiency in the organization and really decrease micromanagement by having larger spans where managers' job is really to manage. It's not really to have a manager who is also an individual contributor, so to have true leaders in the organization. So when that happened, and when the spans of control were changed, all of a sudden managers who had 1 to maybe 3 employees and were basically individual contributors, also working with a few employees, had now 8 to 10 people. And they had to figure out, how do I manage this? Because in the past, they weren't really managing. They were really individual contributors who were just sort of giving direction to maybe 1 to 3 people. So what really needed to happen is that a command and control structure that was in place needed to shift to a more leader-coach model of management. And in shifting to a leader-coach model, the leader needs to know, how do they coach employees? Not in the same way necessarily that, let's say, an ICF certified coach would do that, but really doing much more asking rather than telling, which was very much the opposite of what was happening in the organization, and being far more supportive of individuals being empowered and realizing their potential. So it was really a big shift. So this change, organizational change, is what allowed us to kind of jump into looking at alternatives for how people, leaders, manage. And so coaching became prominent. So the first step was to put together a strategy for this cultural transformation of moving from command and control, top down, to a leader coach model. So you can see here, I've summarized the 4-year strategy. The first year was putting together a training program. That's, I think, what I would call it. It was offered through Performance Consultants International, and they had level 1, level 2, and level 3 in their coaching offerings. What we did was, in the first year, we did a large-scale training program to raise the awareness and educate managers across the organization in terms of what is coaching, why would we be interested in coaching, and how that will be the major lever for them to pull in being able to meet the expectations in their new large span of control environment. So that was year 1. Year 2 was to actually link, and it was being done also in parallel with year 1, kind of midway, the 6th month we started, an ROI study. That's a return on investment study. It's a level 4 or 5, depending upon what model you subscribe to, evaluation process. And the study methodology is outlined in the slide here. The first is to assess the behavioral impact of the coaching training that was given to people. The second is evaluate attitudinal impact. So how does that change first the behaviors and then the attitude? And we're doing this through either the first study was through direct reports of the manager who went through the training. The second is through a random sample of employees across the organization. The third was a correlation study. And then that correlation study looked at the differences between attitudes and performance. And so what was the actual shift? And that was given to managers and their direct reports. And then the fourth was connecting the results of those 3 studies through data analysis. And we partnered with Bocconi University. It's an Italian university in which there was a professor in the UK who was an expert in these kinds of studies. And then one person on my staff had a PhD in IO psychology, and her focus was on studies just like this. So we really wanted to conduct a solid research study on return on investment. It took 1 year. It takes a lot of time to do that. I would not recommend anyone doing an ROI study unless there's a real good reason to do it, because it takes so much time and energy. But because we did it, and the data that came back was so overwhelmingly positive, that we were supported financially by the company in year 3 to do an advanced coaching charter. And that is really getting our directors, senior directors, our VPs to go through the advanced coach training. So this was really to get them to the transformational level of coaching. And then year 4 is when we put together the actual coaching cadre, which I was talking about before, where you actually get the line managers to go through a true ICF certification process. They already had the training. Now they needed to build the hours through coaching in the organization. And today, this company now has something that they call everyday coaching. And they have a department which is just for coaching. So they have, I think, an executive director, a senior director, a director, and then a number of employees. And they have line managers who actually do daily coaching. So the concept is that anybody at any time could get the coaching that they need for them to do their very best at work and to optimize their potential. So it's actually living and breathing in an organization, which means we can do this. But it does take a lot of work, and the vast majority of the work is in convincing the powers that be around the incredible potential and power of coaching. So there's still a lot of the, having to put together a value proposition for executives to understand what the their return on investment will be. Okay, and then I'll go through very quickly and show how we did this. So the first step in pulling together this 4-year strategy was, as I mentioned, to give level 1 and 2 coaching to mid-level managers. So we actually started lower in the organization, not higher. So when doing an organization development transformation, most people say you have to start at the top and cascade down. That's not what we did. What we did was we actually started where the pain was. And the biggest pain point was at the manager, senior manager level, because their spans of control before was maybe 1 or 2 employees. And now they had 8 to 10 employees and didn't know what to do. And they're the ones that had the least skill to handle the change. And there was a lot of interest in this group because of the pain that they were going through. These were the learning outcomes for the curriculum that we provided to the manager and senior manager populations. I won't read everything there, but I'll give you a moment just to be able to quickly read through the learning outcomes. And you can see that it's really about skills and tools. It's also about how do you facilitate the learning through self-directed feedback and accountability. And it's also about being non-directive. The organization was very directive, where it was very much a telling organization rather than an asking organization. Now here's the curriculum. Again, I'm not going to go through everything here, but it gives you an idea of, for the training that these people went through, what were the areas in which we focused on. So active listening was very big and very much needed. Then the model that was used in terms of how do you coach was the GROW model that was developed by Sir John Whitmore, who was the person behind the Performance Consultants International organization. So he was their, like their poster child. And then we also went into emotional intelligence. We talked a little bit about neuroscience. We went into how do you give coaching feedback. And then what does ongoing support and action planning look like? So it was a very, at that time, it was a very robust training. And so what we found was people embrace this. I mean, it was amazing, the level of success that we had. We were very happy, but we were also surprised about, once we got started, how easy it was to get this to take off. Yes.
Hey, Pam, there is a question that Puneet has for you here. He says, how much of team coaching was part of the design originally?
There was no team coaching. That was part of this design. I've used team coaching after I left this company. And I've used it just because in different companies, you have different cultures and you have different pain points. And so in some cultures, one-on-one coaching is what worked. And in others, you can get in the door through team coaching. So I can talk a little bit more about team coaching at the end of the presentation. I'm happy to do that and share my experiences with that.
Super. Will you be sharing these slides with the participants, Pam?
Yeah, sure. There's some confidential information I think I probably should remove, but I will clean it up and then I will send it to the participants.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so
No
much.
problem.
Please carry on. Yeah.
Sure. This is the ROI study. I'm not going to go through much of this information. You'll see what's here. But the good thing is that even though it was extremely heavy lifting, what we ended up with was recommendations that actually stuck. And we co-authored a white paper that was a publishable paper. That's what we agreed on when we had a joint partnership with Bocconi University and PCI. So the message here is that when you're working internally in an organization or even externally with a multinational, partnerships are really important because it's hard for any one person or group to canvas everything that needs to be done in a large scale intervention. This was the methodology. We already went over that. And this is just a quick high level what do you call it, project plan of what we needed to do. You could see this was done about 10 years ago. And what's great is that it is still going on today and it has expanded. The organization now has over 100,000 employees. So it started in a business unit that was about, at the time, 10,000. And the company was around 33,000. Now the company, through acquisitions and internal growth, is over 100,000 and it's going strong. So it's amazing what can be done and the longevity of something like this. Because for multinationals and for global organizations, things change so quickly and things are always either being cut or shifted. And in this case, the everyday coaching is strong and alive today. And here's what it took. So when we first started, in addition to having Bocconi University and PCI as partners, we also got faculty members involved, meaning line people who were interested in helping us. So we needed to have course facilitation. I couldn't afford to have external facilitators come in and teach. We had to teach it ourselves. So it was a matter of money at the time. So we got 4 people internally trained up to be able to facilitate all the training that needed to happen. In addition to the training, we developed coaching clinics where after the training, there was reinforcement for people to come and practice in a safe place. We had 3 people who agreed to be trained up. The 3 people were in HR, so that they were professional coaches in their own right who helped in these coaching clinics. Then we had a team of people to help with communications, and all of this is being done free, right? These are internal people who are willing to give their time to this effort. We had 3 people in communications who did all of the sort of marketing and branding and spread of the word. Because the other thing that's really important to learn is that if you don't create the awareness in the organization through communication, you can be doing brilliant work that nobody's going to know. And it won't filter up to the top. So it's hard to just pitch your case to executives without having a lot of people in the organization also saying the same thing. So the communications faculty group were really important in spreading the word around what was being done and the results that we were achieving. And then ultimately the metrics and evaluation, which was the ROI study, had 4 key professionals who were statisticians and psychometricians who really knew what they were doing in running that ROI study. And that was a really big piece in selling the executives on its value. So there were 14 professionals from HR and business who offered up their time to be part of this transformation. So in retrospect, when I think about it, it's like amazing people who really had a strong level of commitment for wanting to make this change.
Wow. And just a question here at this point. Did you have any resistance with people wanting to buy in or people, not taking it seriously enough? And how did you get them to sort of fall in line? Because sometimes the best of initiatives just don't, go as per plan because people just don't see the wisdom in it, and they don't see the value that it could bring to them.
Yeah, whoever asked that question must work in an internal organization, because it's so true.
Yeah.
There is always resistance that comes up. It's kind of a natural part of any kind of change effort. And the first year is usually the toughest, because the first year is the year you're kind of getting over that hurdle of the resistance. So yes, there was resistance. And the way to get around that resistance, the way that I was able to get around it, is by involving people who actually had the vision and could share the vision with me. Because if I was one lone voice, or me and my department was one lone voice, I'm not going to convince anybody. So you need to develop a groundswell of support around you. So you need to, it takes a while. You have to look and say, okay, who would be the people who actually have the ability to see ahead and what the potential is, and get them involved in some shape or form. So it wasn't, it wasn't something that happens overnight. Let me just tell you, it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of talking with a lot of people. It's lunches with people and talking to them about what the potential is. And it's a lot of people say, no, we don't have time for this. We don't have the money for this. We're not interested. We don't need this. A lot of that happened. But you have to, as a change agent, listen to that, say, well, I think there might be other possibilities. And perhaps, if that person is not the one who wants to help you with the change, you look for somebody else and you keep on keeping on. So I'm so glad that whoever asked that question raised it.
That was my question, actually, because I had something like this when I was working at a bank, at an international bank, and we were trying to introduce something. It was so difficult to get it past the senior people, not the juniors, but the senior guys. They were just not,
exactly.
They would resist change.
That very thing. Yeah, that very thing that you just said, the senior people are the toughest. So what we did is we started lower in the organization. It was a grassroots effort. That's what we did. And then we did a grassroots effort in terms of the training. Most of it was done internally. We got people certified, of course, and then we went out and we provided the training. Then we got a groundswell of support, and then we got the money to be able to do a ROI study. Now, the ROI study that was done was really to convince the senior people, and it took a year to do that. Bocconi University did it free because they got a white paper out of it. PCI did it free because they got press. And of course, all of my employee, who was the PhD in psychometrics in IO Psych, I let her spend the majority of her time working on that project. So we did it strategically because we knew the senior people would never buy in. So we had the groundswell of support to keep the momentum. Then on top of it, we did the ROI study, and that was basically to convince the top. That's what the ROI study is. It takes a lot of work, those correlation studies and the amount of time and surveys that you have to send out and the data analysis. It's a lot of work. But in this case, it was worth it because you can see 10 years later, it's still going strong and it's expanded from one business unit to the entire global company. So then the third step was the advanced coaching, and this was a co-creation. This was sort of the transformational work that we did with more senior people in the organization. By that time, it was already taking off. So you can see it was director, senior director, and VP3, but we didn't try that population until we got the support of the executive group, the VP2 and XCOM. And XCOM is just executive committee. So that's the mid-level was not hard. They were the ones in pain and wanted it. The senior had to wait until we got the support of the executives because that group would not give you the time of day unless it was blessed by the executives. So once we had that blessing, we were able to go into the senior population. And so this internal coaching cadre, just to sum it all up, it started from very humble beginnings. So there were some key leaders who became internal coaches, and where a percentage of their time was really spent devoted to coaching. They were very committed, but it took a while to find them. You had to kind of ferret them out in the organization. And then today, What they have is what I mentioned, everyday coaching, which is a term everybody knows. Like it's one of their, when they go out and recruit, they actually use this term, everyday coaching. And they say, this is what we offer. This is the kind of organization we are. And it really resonates with people, especially these days and with the younger generations. So it's fantastic.
Was it considered a privilege, Pam, for the people who got selected as the coaches to be the coaches for the organization?
When I think today that's the case, yes. It's like if you want to become a coach, there's many now. In the beginning, to be honest, we were just looking for people who were interested. So we would take anybody who had strong interest and strong advocacy. But then as it grew, then of course, you know, if everybody wants to jump in, you can't have everybody doing it. So then you put together a selection process, and then it might include nomination process. And then it becomes whittled down because not everyone is going to become a coach. In the beginning though, like I said, it's humble beginnings. You know, anybody who was willing to like help us do the heavy lifting was more than welcomed. So that's really how it started. We already looked at that. And then the last slide here, and then we can open it up for just dialogue and questions, is the further considerations of what is the mix that you need in an organization. Some organizations are not going to allow line managers and employees time to do coaching internally, you know, 10 or 20% of their time. So what you can do is you can look at those platforms that will allow for one-on-one coaching, like BetterUp and Lingo Live. So it might be a mix. It might be you have a small cadre of people who do internal coaching, and you supplement it by having platforms, which is what I'm doing currently in my company. So my company today, Marvell, is a semiconductor company. If you look at high tech, we're kind of towards the bottom of high tech. Like Google would be at the top, and semiconductor is right below equipment manufacturers. So we don't have the large budgets that somebody like a Google or Medtronic or AbbVie or one of the bigger companies would have. So what do? Well, we could have a smaller group, which I'm starting another coaching cadre next year here. We're designing it this year. And next year in my budget will be for training up those line managers. But in addition, I'm contracting with online platform coaching services to supplement what we can do internally face-to-face or through Zoom. So affordability becomes big in your selection, the mix of what you do in an organization, because basically that's the bottom line. And then the second is accountability and motivation. So like selecting the people who are really highly motivated and will remain accountable through the transformation is really important. So again, in some ways, I think you can say, wow, Pam, that was really strategic thinking on how you organized it. And in other ways, I think it was kind of just lucky that we were able to find the people in the organization who were really willing to be held accountable and motivated to help with the heavy lifting. The next one is the flexibility and freedom. So to what level do you have in the organization the flexibility to bring in innovative ways of developing people? So you have to understand the culture of your organization, and in some places where it may be more traditional, it's not to lose heart, but to take baby steps. And it may take a little bit longer, but you have to understand the culture of the organization, because if the culture is much more, let's say, prone to doing things a certain way, it will really take time to kind of turn the tide. And one of the biggest issues with change agents, I find, is that you just over time get frustrated and then just give up. And so for all of the change agents out there, all of you who are, you know, internal and external coaches facing this, I would say, just be aware of the culture in which you are working and set reasonable goals for yourself and what the transformation can achieve over time, and take baby steps. And that goes to time and schedule in terms of the amount of time, effort, and dollars that you will need in order to achieve your final goal. And then the final thing is around communication and branding. I can't tell you enough how important communication is, because what you're trying to do is to get the word out, but in a much more grassroots, organic way, not a formal way. This is if you don't have top level support. If you're going into a large organization, the concept is new, you're introducing something to democratize coaching in an organization, just like I am right now, my organization is not familiar with it. There was never coaching done in this organization. The company's been around for 25 years. There wasn't a single person who ever got coached in this organization before I came here. Wow. And I just met a few days ago with a client who's a VP who is getting support for executive coaching. And he was like shaking in his seat when we were talking, because he thought he had one foot out the door, that he was going to be fired because he's actually considered a high potential. But people have an old paradigm around coaching. And I was like, oh my gosh, we really have a long way to go before we can kind of make a shift in the world around I call it the magic of coaching. So as a change agent, never be discouraged. I know you can get discouraged, but always remember, even the smallest step can lead to like really huge change over time.
Wow.
So I'll just pause there.
Right. There are a couple of questions that have come up. I'm going to quickly read them out. This Arvind Lokare has asked that, could you share the headlines of the ROI study? And could you share the business results post year 4? Or any other benefits of coaching, like lower attrition?
Yeah, so I think we did not do correlation studies to attrition. We did not do that. It was, what we were trying to do is look at shifts in behavior and actually look at how employees perceive their managers in terms of helping them to improve their own performance. So we linked it to employee perception as well as bottom line performance. So we did look at performance reviews and things like that. Attrition is actually something that you could do over time. The only thing I caution is that, like, I've done one ROI study in my life, and it will be the only one that I do. Wow. Because it takes so much work to do that. So unless you have a pressing case for doing that, I would recommend that you do other kinds of evaluation, which would be maybe a level 3, where you're doing pre-post and then 6 months after feedback from the organization, and using those results. They are more anecdotal and not as much hardcore metrics. But sometimes in organizations could be just as effective. So yeah, I think that's how I would respond to that question.
Right. There's a question from Puneet. He says, what is the second platform you spoke about? One was Better Up and the other one was?
Oh, the second one is Lingo Live, LINGO-LIVE. And Lingo Live is something I just stumbled upon, really, because we have a global organization. And so there's many employees who really have issues around English and accent reduction. And so I wanted to find coaches who actually had a background in ESL, English as a second language. Or I was initially looking for coaches in the native language. And when I found Lingo Live, for certain applications, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful platform to use. So you have to pick and choose the platforms, of course, for who the client is and what they need most. But we've had a lot of success with Lingo Live, where they can coach, but it's not just, they're coaches. But in addition to being coaches, they have the ESL background.
Wow. There's a question from Gopal Sejpal who says, how do you establish accountability? What are the parameters?
And if I could ask Gopal, accountability with whom? You mean
So,
the,
so he says accountability, is it based on hours of coaching or number of people coached when you say?
oh, I see. I never got to that level of metric. So I would have to go back to the company and ask what they have established for their accountability measures. For us, it was actually the something as simple as the amount of hours that people were willing to devote to whatever needed to be done. So it wasn't just coaching, but it was like the marketing, for example, or it was running a report, or it might be putting together a presentation, or it might be facilitating a training course. So the accountability when we first started was tied to activities, if you will, rather than the amount of coaching hours.
Okay. We have a question from Arvind once again. He says, there is a view that ultimately the immediate manager should perform the role of a coach instead of a separate internal or external coach. What has been your experience?
I think that's a good question. I think there's a role for both. So a manager, the relationship between a manager and employee, it's a tricky one because the manager also holds power over the employee just inherently because they're the ones that give the performance review and they're the ones that give the rewards in terms of salary raises, bonuses, stock or stock options, whatever the package is for rewarding performance. And so the manager, what we wanted managers to do is we didn't want to turn managers into certified coaches, really. We wanted to turn managers into leader coaches. That's different. Leader coaches, it means instead of being kind of the, I tell you what to do and you like salute and do what I tell you, it's more that I'm asking robust questions to help you to do your best. And then when I need to, I can be directive as a manager. So we're not trying to turn necessarily line managers into like pure coaches, but you need to have pure coaches in the organization as well. Because when you go to do really stretch people and develop people, that's where coaching can really do some wonderful magic. And so we had both. We wanted to change the culture of the organization from being much more command and control to being much more leader coach, where the leader is using a coaching methodology to help that employee in as many instances as is applicable. But there are some times when managers need to be directive, or managers need to be maybe just supportive, or managers need to delegate and provide employees a full opportunity for empowerment. If you're thinking of it as like a the four different roles of a manager. So I think that you need to have both when you're going through that kind of cultural transformation, both pure coaches who are really trained, and then leader coaches who are simply using an approach of asking rather than telling as their primary form of interacting with employees.
Okay. So there's one last question we can take. We're at 10:28, almost at the top of the hour. Anuradha's son says, how did you ensure commitment for the cause over a sustained period of time? Because many of times people go back to business as usual and lose interest, and one is left holding the baby.
Yeah, very, very good question. Very good question. Again, I think the way that we did it in this one instance, I don't know how I'm going to do it in this next time, but in this instance, it was the groundswell. So in the beginning, we spent a lot of time trying to find people who were really committed. And so I, as kind of the leader of this transformation, did not have to do all of the advocacy. I had many people around me who were willing to help me. And so without that, trying to do it sort of singly or just by like the HR department, I think is a very limited view of how to go through any kind of transformation. You really need to have people from all parts of the business who will continue to be advocates of it. So I think that's the best thing, is just get a groundswell in the beginning And that groundswell will grow. And it's the groundswell that will keep it alive, the grassroots that will keep it alive. You don't have to be the one who's always charging the hill. You'll have people to do that for you.
So Pam, there are a couple of other questions, but we're done with our time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share them with you in an email, and maybe you can respond back to them, and I could share them with the participants, the answers. Is that okay? Yeah.
I'm fine with that. I'd be more than happy to do that. Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. A big namaste and a thank you from all of us in India. It has been so wonderful. Thank you for sharing so generously, Pam.
Thank you so much. And please let me know how the results of the feedback, because I'm always looking, of course, to continuously improve my own ability to communicate and teach and share. So I thank you so much, everybody. It was an honor to be able to present.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for participating in this. It has been an absolute pleasure, and look forward to future webinars and events from the ICF Mumbai chapter. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.